one of the biggest challenges with owning a brand is that you've got a long list of attributes, benefits, features, stories that you want to get across to the consumer. And the challenges of the consumer only wants to hear certain things at certain times. When I'm sitting at my computer shopping for shampoo on Amazon, I don't necessarily want to hear all the details about your founder story. What happened with millennials is that they taught the rest of us how to be who we are today. Millennials showed up and said, wait a minute, I want my food to be healthier. Wait a minute, I don't want to work this much. Wait a minute, I think experiences are more important than stuff. Wait a minute, I think travel is really cool. The rest of us started saying, hey, actually, you're right. A brand positioning template. This is a template that's very specific to brand positioning. It's not the entire framework we talked about before. This is the tool that can help you clarify. There are 5 pieces in this template. The first one is...
So on today's episode of the 2X eCommerce podcast, we dive into the art of brand positioning with Kathy Guzmán, who shares her expert insights on crafting a brand that resonates really deeply with your audience. It's a great episode you don't want to miss, so do stay tuned.
It's the 2X eCommerce podcast, hosted by Kunle Campbell.
Welcome to the 2X eCommerce podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by branding and positioning expert Kathy Guzmán. Kathy brings in a wealth of experience from working with Fortune 500 companies to thrive in direct-to-consumer brands. She'll be breaking down her unique brand fundamentals framework designed to help you clarify your brand's message, connect with your audience, the right audience, and ultimately drive in more revenue for your business. So whether you're looking to scale your brand or refine your marketing position, Kathy's insights are sure to provide you actionable takeaways. At the end of this episode, Kathy has a small gift for you. It's totally free. I don't even think you need to sign up for anything. It's the entire framework we discuss in this podcast for free to download from her website. So be sure to listen to the end. And don't forget to follow us on your preferred podcasting platform, because your support essentially helps us bring incredible guests like Kathy to the show. So without further ado, enjoy this episode. Hey, Kathy, welcome to the 2X eCommerce podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Brilliant. You are a branding expert, brand positioning expert. You've worked with a plethora of Fortune 500 brands as well as DTC commerce brands. But I will like to ask you about your backstory. How did you get to here? What were your beginnings like?
Yes, I was born on a Wednesday around 4:00 in the afternoon. I'm teasing. We don't need to go that far back, do we?
No.
So I started my marketing career officially coming out of business school. I'm originally from the East Coast, was born and raised in New Jersey. My family's from the Dominican Republic, and made my way to Texas and got my MBA at the University of Texas at Austin. And coming out of business school, I went to PepsiCo to work. It's where I started my career, where I have all of my foundation in what is classic brand management and really understanding how to prioritize the consumer. After 8 years at PepsiCo, I went off and worked at a small independent company that was in the beauty space. I then went to work in the dairy industry, with a large company called Dean Food. And then eventually decided I wanted to start consulting. And that was really because what was the driver at the time was that I wanted a little more flexibility in my schedule. I have 2 teenage daughters. They were in elementary school, young in elementary school at the time. And that was really the driver for starting a consulting business. And little did I know that I was going to wind up 12 years later with a consultancy and work that is much more aligned to the kind of person I am and what is ultimately my zone of genius that I discovered through the process. And I should say others helped me discover. And so today I run the Clarity Wizard. I'm the CEO and head wizard at the Clarity Wizard. And we are a brand positioning. We are experts in brand positioning. And that's really all we do. We help our clients maximize revenue and minimize risk by being very clear about who they talk to, what they talk to them about, and why that person should care. And I absolutely love the work I do.
Why? Is
Mhm.
that, are those the pillars of the framework?
It actually, yes, there's a framework that I have created and designed in the last few years called the Brand Fundamentals framework, and it is really a framework that is designed to help brands say all of the things that they want to say. I think that one of the biggest challenges with owning a brand is that you've got a long list of attributes, benefits, features, stories that you want to get across to the consumer, and the challenge is that the consumer only wants to hear certain things at certain times. When I'm sitting at my computer shopping for shampoo on Amazon, I don't necessarily want to hear all the details about your founder story, as an example. That's just not the time and the place. I really don't care. I want a shampoo that's gonna both cleanse and moisturize. That's my priority. That doesn't mean that your founder story isn't important. It just means that it has a time and place. And that's really what the framework was about. And the first step in doing that is to separate all the pieces and organize them. So, a place for everything and everything in its place. Brand purpose is about why you're waking up every day to do the work that you do. Why have you even bothered investing so much of your time and energy into this business? Mission is the literal what you are going to do. What is it that you're going to do in the world? We're on a mission to help people feel more confident about the way they look by creating products that help them look more like themselves. Then that leads to the brand positioning, which is telling us again who is the audience specifically. What is it that you're offering them? And that is very much connected to the product experience, not about all the extra fun things that we offer. And then why should they care? What makes me better than the competitor? What makes my product better than the competitor's product? And why this is the right solution for that problem that consumer is facing. That then leads to brand values, is the fourth piece of the puzzle. Brand values is about how we behave and how we talk. What are the rules that guide how we live in the world as a brand, as an organization that are always going to be representative of that brand? And then that finally leads to identity, which is how we actually look in the world. And that look is reflective of all of the other components. And that framework ensures that all of those fundamental pieces are in place so that you are more effective at communicating to your target audience in a way that is compelling and motivating. At the end of the day, we're asking people to make some sort of behavior change. Buy us instead of them, buy more instead of less. Go to this place to find me instead of going to this other place. You are asking people to do something. And so the most important job is to be compelling and motivating. And having that clarity around what we're saying is the first step to being effective at that motivation.
It's it's very thorough and that's very interesting. So the what is the mission, from what I understand. The positioning is the how, the identity is the look and sound, values are more the behavior, how you behave, and then your purpose is your why. There's a lot to
Exactly.
unpick. Yeah, there's a lot to unpick from that, but I want to track back to my first question,
Hmm.
which is more around your experience in PepsiCo and essentially what pivotal experiences in PepsiCo. I'm looking at your LinkedIn page now. You've worked in so many organizations. In all the other organizations you've worked, what has been essentially what's a pivotal experience there to get you to understanding like brand positioning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the starting at PepsiCo, the first experience or series of experiences that really pushed me in this direction was exposure to traditional consumer research. I think in business school, even in undergraduate, you hear about that. Even as just an everyday consumer, these things occur. People are researching. And you don't know what that means. What does it look like? Who are researching and in what way? And having that firsthand experience to peek under the tent in a really high performance way that showed me and educated me the value of asking a question the right way in order to get an unbiased response. I think
Mm.
learning how to understand others, understand human behavior, is one of the most fundamental things you can do as a marketer, not only because you need to do research, but even in your day to day. There are learnings that are happening around us any moment in time, even in your own home, with you opening the refrigerator door and making a choice about what to drink in that moment is an opportunity for learning and understanding of consumer behavior. And having that initial experience at PepsiCo then led to what were many other experiences in understanding consumer behavior. And over 20 plus years now that I've done countless pieces of research, I've heard from literally thousands upon thousands of consumers over any number of studies. That has remained and has evolved into an appreciation for what our job really is. And our job is to make people happy. You want to be successful, you want to have a successful brand, you got to make people happy. That's literally our only job. And in understanding what they need to be happy, what their other options are, how they evaluate you, how they talk about you in your category, is what makes really all of the difference. And I'm grateful that it started at PepsiCo with such a strong foundation, but it has continued to be reinforced even today, even now. That is still something that I continue to experience and continue to see.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I can imagine at PepsiCo, you had resources to so many consumer insights. The point you made in regards to, I am echoing. I just want to see if on why I'm echoing.
Hmm.
One sec. I'm going to reduce. Right. Okay, so I'm going to record from here. So it's a really good point in regards to what you mentioned in PepsiCo in terms of trying to answer questions about bias, really gets into the nitty gritty of answering questions about the consumer. Do you want to shed a bit more light into techniques you use to just be not biased?
Yeah, it's uh, it's actually a really hard thing to avoid bias in doing research. And I'll be very clear that there are two ways in which bias shows up. In quantitative work, which quantitative research that is based on a large number of a sample size. These are going to be more like surveys that you would do. The bias in that is in the way we ask a question and the responses that we provide in those questions. And the consumer is going to answer specifically what you've asked of them. And that creation question then becomes so important, so that we're not saying, much do you love this brand? But instead, evaluate this brand on these particular metrics so that you are eliminating the language that subconsciously may lead them to one way or to the other. It's a little bit easier quantitative to eliminate the bias, but it's still a big learning curve to understand how to write questions well. A lot of the solve for that today is obviously working with someone like me or professional who would help you craft questions, but also there are a lot of online DIY survey tools today that highly recommend. It brings the cost down of research significantly, and they have a bank of questions that you can work from. And so that's one of the easier ways to solve that bias. On the qualitative side, in qualitative, if quantitative is about a large sample size, that's really about understanding what consumers are doing. How many people are buying low sugar beverages? How many people clean their house twice a week or more? It's giving you hard, big numbers. The qualitative is telling us why people are doing it. Why are they cleaning it more than twice a week? Is it because they're afraid of illness? Is it because they just like to be clean? Are they OCD? It's telling us the why. On the qualitative side, it's a lot more about an interpersonal relationship with a consumer. And so you are having a dialogue with, that's a lot harder to manage the bias. And the rules that I would provide there to help manage those biases is to not ask questions that you think you want to answer, but instead follow a consumer through their logic and their thinking and use why as a tool to get you to the next layer. So you've
Mm.
said that you clean your home twice a week. Why do you think you do? You're not saying, are you cleaning your house because you're OCD? Are you cleaning your house because you're afraid of illness? You're saying, tell me more about why you do that. You said that when you clean, you tend to use the same mop over and over. You don't really empty out the bin and put new water in. Tell me why you do that. And so leaning into the why as opposed to what might be a more pointed question that you would ask if you were talking to a friend. If you and I are talking and say, well, that's interesting. I've never heard of someone cleaning their house more than twice a week. Tell me why you're doing that. Are you nervous about something? You would not say that to a consumer in order to avoid that bias. Both that they're going to want to tell you what they think you want to hear, but they're also protecting themselves. I don't want you to think that I'm a dirty person. So I'm going to tell you that I clean more often maybe than I do. And so eliminating that bias and that subjectivity just ensures that you're getting a more qualitative, or rather, I'm sorry, a more valid response, a more authentic response from that participant. But in both cases, experience is the master. If you're just getting started and trying to learn from your consumers, do more of it. The more you do, the more you realize where you might have had bias in the past, and you'll start to improve on that. Everyone should be talking to consumers all of the
Mm.
time, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And it's another point I want to make. So a segment of this audience will likely have never asked their customer base questions, surveys that they might have one-to-one via emails. What is the best approach? I know you mentioned some tools to essentially help you get that bias out for surveys. And the other question I have is, are interviews better than surveys, like self-serve surveys, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So the first part of your question, which is, what is the range of what research might look like? What does it cost?
Mm.
How in depth it is? How long does it take? And the answer is all of it. There is a tool and an opportunity to do research that is $0 and 5 minutes, all the way up to $1 million and 12 months, right? And the question is actually more about, what is the size of your business? What are the questions that you are asking? And what kind of accuracy level or fidelity do we need in that data?
Mm.
So I believe heavily in something called right sizing for research, especially for research where it's a place that can very easily become too expensive. Sizing means not every brand needs to spend $100,000 on research, but for some brands, you do need to spend more to get the right piece of information. If we were to say, give two examples, there's one brand owner listening who has a fairly new brand. They're under $1 million in revenue. They've been out just a year, a couple of years, and they're just fairly new into the scene. That is the kind of brand that would benefit from a DIY solution online where you're doing surveys online. They would benefit from what was more low cost or free research, for example, surveying customers you already have, doing research by doing social listening. So one of the best research tools that is 1,000% free, that math doesn't math, but that is extremely
Right,
free,
yeah.
it is Amazon reviews, or reviews anywhere really, but Amazon has a great database of that. You want to know what people have to say about your product or a competitor's product? Go spend 2 hours reading Amazon reviews and jotting down notes about what are you seeing are those consistent themes. And then the final thing on for a brand of that size under $1 million would be working with someone like me, or someone who is an expert in qualitative focus groups and interviews, as you described them, are one of the best and lower expense ways to get a lot of information very quickly about the why. There's actually a lot of free research online. So mining Google for some facts and statistics is very easy and cheap. But then you're left with, but why are they doing that? And how does that relate to me and my brand? This is where a focus group can be extremely helpful in giving you some guidance. On the other side of that would be a brand that's a little bit larger. Let's say there's a $25 million and up in revenue. And especially if you're much larger than that, if you are part of an organization and not that you are a brand owner, but you're an employee of a brand that's 100 million plus. In those cases, um, you're going to want to spend money in order to make sure that the data is factual. You want less error. And by what I mean by that is not that a young brand is going to get false information, but that the work that you would do as a brand under $1 million is more about building hypotheses. I just want to get enough information to point me into the right direction. You are very much in a test and learn mode as a young brand. Once you get into the tens of millions of dollars, now you have a lot more to risk. Now making changes to my business can literally mean thousands, if not millions of dollars to my bottom line. I need to be sure that those fractions of facts are as accurate as possible. And this is where we want to then invest in doing more robust quantitative or robust qualitative. And so pricing in those two scenarios for the young brand under $1 million to spend around $10,000 over the course of a year in research is probably appropriate. Upwards to even $25,000. Once you get past the 10 million, 15, $20 million mark, that budget will really just depend on, again, how big your brand is, but can go anywhere from 30, 40,000 in the course of a year to 100, 150, $200,000 in the course of a year. And that is really dependent on your learning plan. And I actually have a learning plan template that I'll make available to your audience. I know at the end we'll talk about where they can reach me, but there's a learning plan template that can be really helpful for this type of exercise, which says, let's first outline the key questions we need to answer. So I own a beauty brand of makeup, and there's so much competition in the world. I really want to understand at the end of the day, when someone is buying mascara, what is the most important thing to them? And then what are the next three most important things so that I can prioritize appropriately? That is a question that I have. I need to figure out what is the right methodology to answer that question. How would I go about answering that specific question? And so the learning plan, what it does is help you identify all those key questions and then work through coming up with what is actually a plan for addressing each one of those methodology by methodology. You lay out the costs, you lay out the timing so that you can figure out exactly what that plan would look like over the course of the year. And that's really the best way to manage answering those strategic questions that'll help you push your business forward.
Interesting. I want to ask if pricing ever comes to play when you're planning a brand.
Yes, absolutely. Pricing is a huge piece. I would actually refer to it as value, is how do you determine what is the right value? And it plays a role really in every part of the discussion with a consumer about the product. And so there are ways that you would learn about price, the specific price, it's $3.99 versus the value. It's a good value or it's not good enough value in comparison to competitors. Very early on in developing the concept, you would get that read. But then there are also times where you need to have very specific and dedicated pricing research, where you are going out to figure out what is the elasticity of this category, what is the right value to price equation, what are people willing to pay more for, and even when you're thinking about product extensions, how do those new product lines or product extensions increase or decrease the price point in my portfolio, which is a strategic question, right? I may have a product that is really high priced and I'm losing a good percentage of the population because it's too pricey for them, even if they want it. And so I might determine that there is an opportunity for me to launch something that's maybe smaller in size, it has less product in it, or it's available for a shorter period of time, and reduce the price in order to get people into the brand. On the other side, you might discover, hey, I really am struggling with my margin, and I got to figure out a way to increase the margin by identifying a solution that a consumer is in need of that perhaps has a higher price point, whether it's price per ounce, price per unit, or total net price. How do I increase the overall margin of my business? And so research is critical when it comes to pricing because it's one of those things that consumers look at and immediately can make a decision on a
Yeah,
brand based on that price point. So yeah, there's a lot of room for research and pricing.
there is indeed. I thought, regards to the steps or actually the cadence, Brand, I'll give you something anecdotal. We acquired a business about 2 years ago, and one of the first things we did is we got someone like you, the Nature's a boutique agency, to essentially give us a map forward, like what is roadmap towards essentially scaling this brand out. And so we did surveys, we did focus groups, and we got to the heart of it. And then there was an output that came off the back of it. It was like a strategy doc that came out of it. It was not too extensive because we didn't have too much money to really dash out. And it was a £1 million brand. And then you talk about the fact that for a 25 million, $100 million brand, you need to do it again. So what is the cadence? When do you realize that, wow, okay, this has run its course. This plan has essentially run its course and we need to refresh? Or is it an ongoing investment you take on every year to just to adjust to market dynamics?
It's yes and yes. It is both
Oh,
of
wow.
those things in that. So the the benefit of the learning plan, and by the way, the learning plan really as an input into optimizing brand positioning, right? It to make
Mhm.
sure that we're always talking to the consumer about the right thing at the right time. The learning plan is twofold. Is one is there are questions that I need to answer right now. I need to understand this because I've already identified it as a problem in my brand or in my business. But then there is also room in the learning plan for ongoing learnings. So the world that we live in today is a world in which every 30 days there's some new thing that is trending. Years ago, 20 years ago, actually, when I started at PepsiCo, more than 20 years ago now, I started at PepsiCo. I was working on and at the time we were looking to reposition it because everyone was coming off of the low fat craze and moving into the low carb craze. And that period of time where low fat existed and then it was started to pivot into low carb was literally years and years. And
Mhm.
then we pivoted into this low carb, which has continued to exist in one form of another. And it was a little bit more slow moving at the time. Whereas today, things move so much faster. Consumers are educated so much more than they were before. Even if they don't understand why things work the way they do, they understand what they should and shouldn't be taking into their bodies or what they do and don't want or what the options are in the world. And so keeping a pulse on what is happening in the world on a day-to-day basis, particularly with your target audience, has to occur in a continuous, never-ending loop. And that looks like a lot of things. It can look like actual research. There's one client, for example, where we worked on developing a cadence for twice a year consumer immersions. It's twice a year. We spend 2 or 3 days in a particular market and we do all the things that our consumer does. We spend the time eating where they eat, working where they work. We visit the types of schools that their kids are in. We go where they're grocery shopping. We look at the kinds of homes they live in. We're really just trying to understand them as an individual. But there are other ways to do that. That can be as simple as calling your customers once a month. I'm going to get on the phone. I'm going to call somebody who's recently bought my product and just figure out what they're up to and what they're learning, right? So that's that continuous part that you add as a layer to these specific questions I need to answer for the problems I am solving for today. Both of those things need to occur and should be reflected in your learning plan.
Interesting. And how do you feed all of this to critical functions in a business? So to give you some context, a lot of listeners in this podcast are super interested in performance marketing, search or social, advertising. And to be honest, with what I've seen in a lot of accounts, it's just some media buyer just guessing that it's all about, the game is about testing. But a lot of the time, the media buyers aren't given parameters as to, okay, these are your limitations. So if you find situations in which they're completely off brand, but some of those off brand creatives are driving a lot of conversion. So they just so they're now essentially guiding the path for the company. And it gets to a point where, those creatives no longer work, and then they're stuck. They're not able to acquire customers. They just play to, and that's it. So what is the efficient way to strategically pass on, without making things stiff and fixed, insights from a brand plan to other key revenue generating functions in a quite agile company? Most people listening to this are part of very agile young companies.
Yeah. This is such a great question and a really important topic. And brands that are a D2C exclusively, particularly if you are not in brick and mortar, or if brick and mortar is just a very small piece of your business, it happens a lot that what is occurring in the digital marketing world can very easily drive strategy in the opposite direction, right? Rather than the brand driving the strategy, the marketplace is driving the strategy. And the reason that this happens, I hypothesize, is because there's a real big conflict between the strategic approach to digital marketing and the strategic approach to brand development and business development. In that, in the world of in the digital world, broadly speaking, we operate in the context of specificity to the 100th degree. And the way that we execute marketing plans, and certainly at the very last leg, even if at the beginning we are talking in broader strategic terms, it eventually moves to a place where we're saying a woman who is 47 and has 3 kids, and she has a higher education degree and shops for Tide pens is my target, along with 10 other of these versions of people. There's also a woman who doesn't have kids, but she's highly motivated to work and she buys champagne, right? There are these personas that we leverage necessarily for the efficiency and effectiveness of that digital marketing work. The business and the strategy side, the business and the brand side, it actually operates a little bit differently in that you need to start with a view of the total market and then move into a synthesized and summarized version of who your core consumer audience is. So while yes, let's take a brand like Gatorade, actually use a lot as an example, Gatorade brand markets to a lot of people, a lot of different diverse people. But what they have identified as their core consumer are people, these are my words, not theirs, but people who are thirsty, people who are active in some way that causes them to be thirsty and therefore need to replenish the liquids in their bodies. That is a gigantic audience of people. That's basically everyone in the country. For most brands, your audience is not that large, but the synthesis of a consumer target is that broad. It should be that broad because you need enough of an audience in order to actually have a scalable business, right? That's a conflict. So what has to happen, regardless of the size of the brand, the industry, even where you are distributed, D2C versus brick and mortar, it doesn't matter. If you're doing it outside of the trunk of your car, all of the brands need to have a strategic ownership of the brand position, which includes the brand's promise. That's the key message that the consumer is going to take away. I'll give you a good example of that is, if it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide's brand promises. The thing is always going to be clean, no matter what. You need to know what that brand promise is, and you need to know what are the key messages that resonate with that audience. That has to be the standard by which we begin. And the way that a brand owner can manage that through execution is to start every conversation there and then finish every conversation there. So we're all agreeing here that this is who we're talking to. This is what we're saying to them. This is what we want them to hear from us. What does that look like in digital marketing? Great. It's a huge, long, detailed plan. It has all these personas, has all these placements, these variants of creative executions. Perfect. Love all of that. Does it loop back to the brand positioning? Are all of these things we've described consist an authentic representation of the brand positioning that we have aligned on? If no, then we need to stop. That doesn't mean that we eliminate the test and learn process, which is incredibly important when you have an e-com brand.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that it gives you guardrails for what we know to be true and what we can test and learn. You might discover that the agency says, look, we have a hypothesis that right now you're prioritizing message A, but actually we think it needs to be prioritized to message B. Fantastic. Let's test it. That means a small piece of our budget is validating that. I would include that in a learning plan. That is part of research. That's part of you learning what works and what doesn't. But it doesn't change the course that we're on until we've proven that is a better and more effective way of talking about our business, in which case, then we can pivot. But until we've proved it and we know we have the validation behind it, we don't just throw things at the wall. We have a perspective, we have a strategy, and the brand owner owns it. I actually talk a lot about this idea that as an owner of a brand, of a business, you need to be the one in the driver's seat. What happens a lot in this, you just described one of those scenarios, is that when a brand owner does not have a strong point of view or a strong vision or a strong strategy for what the business is doing, you hire someone to do work for you. Their job is to shine. Their job is to over-deliver work for you. They want to show you results. And so if you're not controlling how they show the results, they're going to do what is necessary in order to get you the results because that's their job. That doesn't always mean that the results you get are the best results for your business. And so it has to come back to you. It is not their fault to solve. It is that you have not provided the right kind of guardrails and guidelines. And so I encourage anyone listening who owns a brand to figure out, how do you document and have what I call a brand manual that says, these are our strategic points. This is what our brand positioning looks like. This is exactly who our consumer is. And these are the things we are not doing. We are not talking this way. We are not going after this. We're not competing with these people. We are doing this. And then allow anyone who's involved in your business to challenge that and offer you hypotheses. If you feel confident that one of those hypotheses has value, then go test it. But start from a position of power, of strength, of having a perspective, and then allow others to help you optimize that and get it better instead of allowing others to drive that. It's really important.
Yeah. That's a very detailed answer, and I resonates with a lot of the points you made, particularly the final point around you taking ownership as a leader, as a proprietor, as a founder of a business to really guide, essentially, I'll say the words, how you describe things, which ties into what's your brand promise, what you talked about with regards to a brand promise. It's so powerful because if I tell you that this adjusts the light of my studio lights, this device here, and the promise here is to always be in control there, at least that's a wedge that people can take on. That doesn't change. It's persistent with the expectation of when we ship this to customers, that's exactly what this particular device is going to do. And then people can experiment. Another anecdotal example is we're in the process of scaling a beauty device brand at the moment. And our hypothesis was a certain demographic. So we thought a certain demographic, women age 25 to 39 will be the core base. And we just made some adjustments to some of the influencers we work with. And it turns out that the over 40, the 40 to 59 demographic are much more effective. And you look at Meta is always telling you to don't be specific. We know what we're doing. Our AI will tell you. So I think that conversation between performance, and you mentioned it, which is using performance as a research hypothesis generation center to answer questions, to just directly inform the brand planning is so important. It just makes you agile and able to adapt in this ever-changing world, because the AI and Meta is really investing in AI now, and it's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll build a little bit on that to give brand owners a sort of a pass, if you will, in that the reason this happens, the reason why you wind up and you find yourself in a place where the tail is wagging the horse is that we just don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty, particularly for folks that are coming into owning a business, owning a brand that maybe this is new to them. They haven't done it before, or this is still fairly new. You're just still in the learning process. There I've been a brand owner myself, and I've worked with a lot of particularly startup brands. Is there's no fear in the work, right? I can invest money and I'm going to lose it, or I'm going to set up my brand in the wrong way. And the folks that I'm bringing into my ecosystem, they are experts. They know what they are doing. And there's this sense that I need to rely on them to help guide me in the right direction. And you absolutely should, because there are a lot of smarter people out there than me, and I definitely want their input. Where there's a slight difference that I'd like to encourage everyone listening to consider is that you don't need to know everything there is to know about the industry to have a point of view. It doesn't mean that your point of view is right. Maybe you're wrong, but you can start from a point of view. You can start from a place to say, I know this space. I've been evaluating this. I'm working on it. I'm looking at what's available in the world, and I can have a place to begin from and then hold myself accountable to that strategy, that perspective, that vision, while I allow the experts to help me make it better. Let them help me improve it, as opposed to let them help you drive it. The other thing I'll say to that, one more thing I will offer to your audience that I'll put also in the link we'll talk about in a minute, is a brand positioning template. This is a template that's very specific to brand positioning. It's not the entire framework we talked about before. This is the tool that can help you clarify. There are 5 pieces in this template. The first one is who is this for? And that is really a description of the kind of person. This has nothing to do with their problem or their issue or what you're solving for. It's really, what kind of person is this? So we go back to the Gatorade exercise. This is somebody who's out in the world. They're out in the world. Maybe they live somewhere where it's hot. Maybe they're exercising. This is someone who has an active life. The next piece is the need statement, the insight statement that is stating what the problem is. And so if we were to take one of Gatorade's products, they have one that's a 0 sugar. We'd say that the problem is they want to drink something that hydrates them, but everything out there has sugar in it. And they're tired of it. They don't want the sugar. They don't want that for their body. That is the problem that we're addressing. The next piece would be the brand promise, just as you described. Like, what is the thing that you are giving me that I'm coming to your brand for? Gatorade Zero example, the brand promise might read something like hydration with less sugar, right? Or hydration with no sugar. That's what I'm selling you, period. Then comes the reasons to believe. And those, I force my clients to stick to 3. And 3 are going to be the most important reasons why I think Gatorade Zero is the right thing for me. Number 1, it's going to taste great. Because when you're in beverages or food, 99% of what we're selling is taste. So number 1, it's going to taste delicious because it's Gatorade and we know how to make drinks taste great. Number 2 is it literally has no sugar. That's why you're here. That's the reason you can believe, because we're using whatever sweetener they're using in order to reduce the sugar content, but ensure that it still tastes great. And then the third thing is you're here for hydration. So the third point is it has electrolytes. It has water. These are the ingredients that are actually hydrating your body. And there's a lot more I could say about Gatorade, but that's not what the consumer cares about in that moment. So the brand positioning template, as a minimum, lowest effort exercise to get into the right direction, this template can help you do that. It can really focus you in on I need to make a strategic choice about what my promise is. I need to make a strategic choice about what the problem is I'm solving. I need to make a strategic choice about what kind of person this is. And then what are the reasons that I'm going to prioritize in order to be compelling to you? If you can do that work, you're halfway there because
Hmm.
that is the starting point to just reducing the noise and getting that clarity and focus around what this brand stands for. And it is a starting point to literally everything else. Yes, advertising, but also product development and innovation. Also, how you think about pricing, what channels you would be in, and how you talk about your brands in those channels. But definitely packaging and what the packaging looks like is actually the most important thing in packaging is that positioning statement. And so starting with that at the very least, which again, I'll make the template available to your audience,
Yeah.
is the best way to start that process and to start to feel like you're a little bit more in control, right? Because that's the other thing. If I ask you, tell me your brand positioning, you probably start rattling off, is this, and it'll take you a couple of minutes to describe it. This template helps you say, oh, this is exactly what it is, point, and you feel a lot more confidence when you have that.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about templates and frameworks is it just makes things scalable, repeatable, and systematic, which
Exactly.
would really helps in this world where. So just to clarify, it starts with the who, the problem you're solving, the brand promise, what is it I'm giving, and then three reasons to believe
Correct.
that brand promise. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So just wrapping up because yeah, it's been almost an hour that has passed by. It feels like it's five minutes, and there's been so much value you delivered in in just going to the framework. The first framework you mentioned, which was the values, the mission, the positioning, identity, and
Mhm.
purpose, is the most important of those components. Founders should essentially focus on, and then it has cascading effects, almost like a domino effect on the others.
A brand. The brand is new and you're still working things out and figuring out what the brand is. You got to start with brand positioning. When I teach classes on this and when I do on the entire brand fundamentals framework, I actually start with positioning. It's the thing people get the most easily. And it's the place where we're most concerned because that's is what we're going to tell consumers. This is what we're going to actually use to sell our product. And so that is definitely the most important thing. But what happens often, which is how I wound up creating this framework, is that we start to put things into brand positioning that don't belong there.
Hmm.
And so if you start writing the brand positioning document, if you use my template, you start writing and you find yourself putting things in that you're like, I don't know if this really fits. And in your case, you might say, this is a Black founded company, a Black owned company. Is
Hmm.
that important right now? I don't know. Like, I'm selling socks. Do people care that this is a Black owned company? I don't know that. You make a judgment on that. And that needs to come out. If you're saying, actually, I don't think that this is relevant for positioning, because positioning is about getting someone to buy this product. And you being Black has nothing to do with socks. If you are Mexican, of Mexican descent, and you're selling tortillas, different issue, right? Now it doesn't matter. Now there's some authenticity story that's connected to that. So once you start to see that there are things you're trying to put into positioning that don't, that's when then it's time to start figuring out the rest of the puzzle. And for some young brands, depending on the brand. For example, I worked with one brand it's a cookie brand that is owned by two gay men. They're two husbands, and they have a foundation where they are raising funds to support young gay kids in the United States. We had to solve their purpose, mission, values right away because so much of their business was about. If that's you are running a brand in which your own purpose, I'm not talking about social mission. I don't mean that you have to be giving money away. It doesn't matter what your brand is selling, you have a purpose, 100%. And so sometimes that purpose has to be defined early and you need to address it right away and you need to deal with all of them. But as you get bigger and more established, there does come a point in time where you start to realize as I'm bringing external parties in to help with my business, or I'm talking to retailers or anyone that I'm trying to partner with, I'm realizing that I got to tell more of the story. I got to tell my founding story. I need to talk about my values and why I won't take your ingredient that was sourced in XYZ place because it doesn't fit the values of my brand. And certainly in identity, when you start to optimize and refresh your packaging. Every brand goes through a rebrand at some point after it's been out in the marketplace. That's when you got to start getting all those pieces pulled together. And I'll say the last thing about all that is it would be my preference that everyone does all of it right at the beginning. But if you have to make a choice, you've got to get your brand positioning locked in. And then from there, pick the other pieces of the fundamentals that are going to be most impactful to your type of business. And I'm happy to chat with anyone about that. It's easy to get some time on my calendar, give you some guidance and direction on how exactly do you think about the brand fundamentals. And then maybe one last thing I'll say is know that this is hard work. This is not the kind of thing you're going to do. You're going to spend an hour on it. Look, I did it. It's done. You're going to spend a lot of time and you are always going to be optimizing brand positioning. I have a client, the brand is 180 years old. We're still working on brand positioning because the consumer is always changing, because words always change. And so it's a never ending process, but start with brand positioning.
Incredible, incredible, incredible. Speaking of diversity, we had the e-commerce performance marketing manager who was like key to revenue for this business. They're $100 million business. They sell essentially photo frames. So for memories, a brand's called Mix Tiles. So a few years ago, we had him, Oren, on an Israeli business. So we had him on a conference. We organized a virtual conference. And he mentioned something around diversity. So they were not very, because they're based out in Israel, they're not very familiar with the nuance of like demographics in the USA, and their primary market was USA, not even Canada. It was USA. That's where they get majority of their funds. And most of their advertising was just had Caucasian families, essentially, because you're selling memories, right? So you're selling essentially to women who are going to put the memories and decorate the house, married family women. And they decided to change it up a bit. I don't know how they discovered, but they decided to put ethnic minority families on there. And that year, that accounted for almost a 33% increase in revenue. And we're talking about at the scale of tens of millions of dollars here. We can obviously into Meta and all of a suddenness, and there was a lot of affinity from African American families and the ethnic minority consumers. So my question is really, how do you authentically strategize for diversity, particularly for CPG brands or e-commerce brands? On the flip side, if you put that you are black owned in the UK, no one will really care. In the UK, they'll say, yeah, but in America, it's a whole different conversation. So I would like you to give us a little bit of a breakdown of how diversity really works in the context of the market you're more familiar with, which is the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. The US, we're just so tricky in so many ways. We like to be special. We like to do everything in our own special way. Hard to summarize how diversity plays a role, or ethnicity or race or even gender, sexual orientation, income levels, all these sort of levers of demographics, how they play a role in brand positioning, in messaging, even in language and how we speak to consumers. And so what I will say about it, the short version is we like to be recognized as individuals, that the individuality in the United States is such a huge component of our culture and who we are. What is underneath that is a desire to be seen that is not unique to Americans. We just like to showcase it on our shoulder. That is true for everyone in the world. We all want to be seen and understood and heard, and therefore reflected in the products and services that we buy into. So I will put aside in this conversation, because it's not an area of expertise of mine, but incredibly important, the desire for organizations to become diverse themselves or to market to a more diverse population because they feel it's the right thing to do. that is an issue of values. And it takes a completely different conversation than what I am about to talk about, right? So if that is where your business is thinking and going, there is specific work to be done around that really doesn't necessarily fit within business strategy. So I'll put that to the side. And I'm happy to refer to a bunch of people who I know that actually work in that space. The other side of the coin is there's a business opportunity. Either I'm missing out on it and I don't know, or I realize there's an opportunity that I'm not tapping into because I don't understand the broadness of the audience. The very easiest way to begin this conversation is by saying that the way that we used to do marketing in the past, and I'm not talking about digital marketing here, I am talking about brand management, strategic marketing that happens at the business strategy level. We used to talk a lot about demographic. Women who work from home, or rather women who don't work and who are homemakers, men who travel a lot, teenagers whose parents are wealthy, and then also by generation. So we're going to target millennials. When I first started in my career, that was the hot topic. The way we talk about Gen Z or even Gen Alpha now, we were talking about millennials. Everything was, who is your target millennials? Who is your target millennials? What happened with millennials is that they taught the rest of us how to be who we are today. Millennials showed up and said, wait a minute, I want my food to be healthier. Wait a minute, I don't want to work this much. Wait a minute, I think experiences are more important than stuff. Wait a minute, I think travel is really cool. The rest of us started saying, hey, actually, you're right. Now that I'm seeing these products come to life, this is something that I want as well. And that turned into what is called the millennial mindset. And the millennial mindset has nothing to do with your generation. It doesn't matter how old you are. There are 75-year-olds that are more millennial than millennials are, because it's about these ideas and these principles that they brought to the table that were then reinforced by the world we lived in, right? We reinforced by the iPhone and the internet and Google. And so now we all share these values. What that has meant in the last 5 years in particular is that we've moved away from a demographic focus and more to a psychographic focus. Something I say all the time is demographics don't matter until they do. They matter if you're talking to women who just had a baby, right? Now it matters. You're not going to talk to a man. It matters that she's a woman. If it is not about a specific demographic that literally is driving the product, then really the demographic is not as important. What's important is, what does this person care about and what do they want? So mixed tiles, if we take that as the example, what I would bet that they learned either before they decided to make the change or learned quickly after is that it doesn't matter what color you are. You want to showcase your family. You want your home to be beautiful. You want to put stuff up on the wall. Even a minute ago, you made the comment about like they were marketing to women who care about memories and care about their house looking beautiful. That's not exclusive to women. That are actually many people who feel that way across the gender spectrum, across the age spectrum, across regions and marketplaces. And instead, what we're looking for are people, perhaps they may have gotten to a place where they're looking for people who are interested in unique ways to show their memories in a way that looks beautiful and professional, but is also easy to do. They're just, I want to be part of the process of doing that. I don't want to fire someone. And this lets me do that in a really beautiful way. That may be what they have discovered. So the takeaway here is focus less on the demographics and focus more on the need and the solution and how that consumer will really think about your product, and you'll be way more successful at doing that. And it allows diversity to naturally exist in that audience. Right? You don't have to go work to see it. Well, do Black people care? It doesn't matter because they're already included in the way that they're thinking. And if they're not thinking it, then they're not included because it's about the thinking and the feeling and the desire and not about the color of their skin or their age or their gender. Unless it matters. Again, unless it matters. Yeah. Oh, I lost your audio. Oh, I think you muted yourself.
No, that's an excellent answer to the question I had. And at the end of the day, it's about people and their feelings and how they want to be heard. And once you are empathetic enough, it's not even a question. You'd intuitively know how to include, even from insights will tell you, this goes back to one of your first points about unbiasedly asking questions. And then what are you going to do about those questions, the answers that you get? And that's where they flourished. And just to make a correction, there's actually a 35% reduction in ad spend as
More
against
effective.
an increase in revenue. I just checked it out anyway, just to correct myself. Yeah, so it's a really good, brilliant stuff, Kathy. For people who want to find out more about what you do, I have your website. It's theclaritywizard.com. But you do also have some goodies for our audience. You have your brand fundamentals document, as well as the Clarity Catalyst blank template for really planning your brand for free, totally free on your
Right.
website. So for people who want to find out more there, it's theclaritywizard.com/podcast. I will link to it in the show notes wherever you're listening to this. Are you active on any social media platforms? If anyone wants to follow your work, or anyone who's listening to it up until this point would want to follow your work, so would
Yes.
you? Which ones, if any?
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, and I accept all invitations. I think LinkedIn is the square of the community, and we're all here to meet each other, and I accept all invitations. And by the way, on that /podcast, I'll also add, which are not there today, but I will add the learning plan template, as well as pull out in that Clarity Catalyst document is the brand positioning template, but I'll pull it out as its own standalone so folks can find it really easily and make sure that they're able to get to those two tools. And of course, if there's anything I can do to help you or your audience learn how to use those or develop them, I'm happy to do. Just reach out and we can chat.
Really appreciate your time here, Kathy. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So thank you for tuning in to this episode of the 2X e-commerce podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Kathy Guzmán as insightful as I did. Her expertise in brand positioning is truly invaluable for anyone looking to redefine their message and connect more deeply with their audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the 2X e-commerce podcast on your preferred platform. Your support helps us bring more incredible guests and valuable content straight to you. Don't forget to leave us a review and share this episode with fellow entrepreneurs, operators who could benefit from the insights. Until next time, folks, keep pushing the boundaries on growing your e-commerce business. Thank you for listening.